Adrian Lancaster was no stranger to luxury. At 32, he had built an empire of wealth, owning high-end real estate developments, luxury resorts, and a series of five-star hotels across the world. He was used to exclusivity, surrounded by the elite, sipping on the finest whiskey, and walking into rooms where his name alone commanded respect. Yet, on this particular evening, none of his riches or influence could save him from the sheer embarrassment of his current predicament. It all started at the Lancaster Grand Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in the city, where Adrian was hosting an exclusive charity gala. Dressed in a tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his tall frame and chiseled jawline, he had spent the last few hours mingling with investors, celebrities, and socialites. The event was a success. Champagne glasses clinked, laughter filled the air, and millions of dollars had been raised for a foundation he barely remembered agreeing to sponsor. But after several rounds of whiskey, Adrian felt the need to excuse himself. With confidence and a slight buzz clouding his judgment, he strode toward the restrooms at the far end of the grand hall. The golden plaques indicating men and women were sleek but hardly noticeable under the dim, ambient lighting. His mind occupied with business deals and flirty exchanges with models, he pushed open the door without a second thought and stepped inside. The restroom was lavish as expected. The floors were made of Italian marble, the countertops lined with gold-trimmed mirrors, and the scent of fresh lavender filled the air. Adrian barely registered these details as he entered one of the private stalls, locking the door behind him. It wasn't until he was ready to leave that he realized something was terribly wrong. There was no toilet paper. He frowned. A minor inconvenience, but nothing to panic over. He checked the nearby compartments, empty. His irritation grew. How could his own hotel fail at something as basic as restocking toilet paper? Adrian pulled out his phone, considering texting his personal assistant, but then hesitated. How ridiculous would that message be? Hey, stuck in the bathroom, no toilet paper. Help! His pride refused to allow it. He took a deep breath, deciding to wait. Perhaps someone would enter soon, and he could discreetly ask for help. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. The longer he waited, the more absurd the situation became. Finally, he heard the soft clicking of heels against the marble floor. Relief washed over him. "Excuse me," he called out, keeping his voice as composed as possible. "Could you do me a small favor?" Then a woman's voice, smooth and amused, responded. "That depends. What kind of favor?" Adrian hesitated. "It's a little unusual," he admitted. "Try me." He exhaled sharply. "I need toilet paper." Beat of silence, then laughter. Not just a chuckle, but a full, unapologetic laugh that echoed through the restroom. Adrian's face burned. He wasn't used to being laughed at, especially not by a stranger. "Wow," the woman finally said, her voice laced with amusement. "A billionaire stuck without toilet paper. This is gold. Are you going to help or just enjoy the moment?" Adrian asked, his patience wearing thin. "Oh, I'm enjoying it for sure," she replied, still chuckling. "But I suppose I can be merciful." A moment later, a folded stack of tissues was slid under the door. Adrian snatched it up, muttering a low, "Thank you." "You're welcome, Mr. Lancaster," she said sweetly. His head snapped up. "How do you know my name?" Another laugh. "You're hosting the event. Your face is literally on the banner outside." But that made sense. But still, there was something about her tone that unsettled him. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made him curious. By the time he finished composing himself and stepped out of the stall, the restroom was empty. He frowned, looking around. No sign of her. The only hint of her presence was the faint scent of vanilla lingering in the air. As he stepped toward the sinks, a horrifying realization struck him. The restroom had no urinals. His blood ran cold. His eyes darted to the grand mirror above the sinks, where elegant floral arrangements decorated the countertops. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had entered the women's restroom. A string of curses left his lips. No wonder she had been laughing so hard. For the first time in years, Adrian Lancaster, the untouchable, the composed, the ever-so-powerful businessman, felt truly humiliated. Later that evening, Adrian couldn't shake the encounter from his mind. He scanned the crowd at the gala, searching for a woman with a knowing smirk and a vanilla-scented presence. His assistant, Mark, noticed his distraction. Looking for someone. Just trying to find someone who helped me earlier. Mark raised an eyebrow. Helped you how? Adrian hesitated. It's complicated. Before Mark could probe further, a group of investors approached, pulling Adrian into yet another conversation about profit margins and overseas expansions. But his mind remained elsewhere, fixated on the mysterious woman who had humiliated him yet helped him at the same time. Who was she? And why, despite the embarrassment, did he want to meet her again? The night continued with a blur of polite conversations, strategic handshakes, and the occasional forced smile, but Adrian Lancaster's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman from the restroom. She had humiliated him, yes, but she had also intrigued him in a way he hadn't expected. Who was she? More importantly, why was he so obsessed with finding her? As a billionaire accustomed to being in control, Adrian wasn't used to unanswered questions. He was the kind of man who could find out anything about anyone with just a few phone calls. If someone caught his attention, he had the means to track them down. And tonight, his curiosity was running wild. Standing near the bar, he scanned the ballroom, looking for any sign of a woman who seemed to be suppressing a knowing smirk. He considered asking around, but how would he even phrase the question? Hey, have you seen a woman who laughed at me in the bathroom? Not exactly smooth. Mark, his ever-efficient assistant, appeared beside him, handing him a fresh glass of whiskey. You seem distracted. Adrian took the drink, swirling the amber liquid. Just thinking. About the event. Not exactly. Mark raised an eyebrow but didn't push. He knew better than to pry when Adrian was in one of his moods. Instead, he changed the subject. The investors from Dubai are interested in a new luxury resort deal. They want a private meeting tomorrow. Adrian barely registered the information. Set it up. Mark sighed. All right, what's going on? You're usually laser-focused at these things, but right now, you look like a man searching for something. Adrian hesitated, debating whether to confide in his assistant. Finally, he sighed. There was an incident. Mark smirked. Do tell. Adrian gave him a deadpan stare. I walked into the wrong restroom. Mark choked on his drink, coughing as he processed the information. You. Adrian Lancaster. Mr. Perfection himself. Please tell me you're joking. Adrian scowled. I wish I was. Mark was still grinning. And let me guess, someone caught you. Adrian took a sip of his drink. Yes, woman. And she didn't just catch me, she helped me. Then she vanished. Mark's amusement turned into curiosity. Helped you how? Adrian sighed, reluctant to relive the embarrassment. There was no toilet paper. Mark nearly doubled over in laughter. Oh, this is gold. This is better than any scandal I could have imagined. So what, she just handed you some tissue and walked away? More or less, Adrian admitted. But the way she laughed at me. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't impressed by who I was. She just found the whole thing amusing. Mark wiped a tear from his eye. And now you're obsessed with her. I wouldn't say obsessed, Adrian muttered. Mark smirked. Right. That's why you've been scanning the room all night. Adrian ignored him, his eyes still searching. I need to find out who she is. Mark, ever resourceful, pulled out his phone. Well, we're in your hotel. If she was a guest, I can have security check the attendee list. Adrian hesitated. Something about that felt wrong. He wasn't used to playing fair, but this wasn't a business deal. It was personal. And he had a feeling that if he resorted to tracking her down through security footage, she'd only mock him even more. No, Adrian said. I'll find her myself. Mark chuckled. Suit yourself. But I'll bet you this. If she's the kind of woman who laughed at you, she won't make it easy. The next morning, Adrian was back at Lancaster Grand Hotel, not as a host, but as a man on a mission. He started with the most obvious route, speaking to the hotel staff. Do you know a woman who was working last night? Mid to late 20s, confident, probably smirking a lot. He asked one of the front desk employees. The receptionist blinked. Sir, we have over 50 female staff members who worked the gala last night. Could you be more specific? Adrian exhaled. He hadn't even seen her face properly. Just heard her voice, sensed her presence. How was he supposed to describe that? He tried another approach, speaking to one of the event coordinators. Was there a staff member who had a moment with a guest last night? He asked. The woman frowned. Not that I know of, Mr. Lancaster. Was there an issue? Not at all, he said quickly. I just wanted to personally thank someone for their assistance. The woman nodded. I can check with the hospitality team. Do you have a name? Adrian hesitated. Of course he didn't. Never mind, he said, forcing a smile. I'll figure it out myself. It wasn't until late afternoon that he caught his first real break. As he walked past one of the staff lounges, he overheard laughter. Sharp, familiar laughter. Peering through the open doorway, he spotted a group of hotel staff chatting during their break. And among them, sitting casually with a cup of coffee in hand, was her. His stomach tightened with a mix of relief and something else he couldn't quite define. She had long, dark brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, striking green eyes, and a posture that exuded effortless confidence. She was dressed in a simple black uniform, a stark contrast to the glamorous women he was used to being surrounded by. But there was something about her, something that made it impossible to look away. As if sensing his gaze, she glanced up, and the moment their eyes met, a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. Well, well, she said, setting her coffee down. If it isn't Mr. Lancaster. To what do I owe the honor? Adrian stepped forward, determined not to let her throw him off balance. You disappeared last night. She raised an eyebrow. Did I? You never gave me your name, he pointed out. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with amusement. I suppose I didn't. And yet, here you are, tracking me down like a man on a mission. Adrian smirked. I wanted to thank you properly. For the toilet paper, she teased. His smirk faltered slightly. For the kindness. For the first time, her playful demeanor flickered, replaced by something unreadable. Then, just as quickly, she recovered. Emily Carter, she said, extending a hand. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Lancaster. He shook her hand, ignoring the way his pulse quickened at the contact. Something told him that meeting Emily Carter was only the beginning of a much bigger story. Adrian Lancaster wasn't used to chasing after women. If anything, they usually sought him out, drawn to his wealth, power, and the lavish lifestyle he could provide. But Emily Carter, she was unlike anyone he had ever met. After finally learning her name, he had expected the usual reaction. A little nervousness, maybe some awe at his status. Instead, Emily seemed entirely unfazed. If anything, she found his interest amusing, which only made Adrian want to figure her out even more. As he stood in front of her in the hotel staff lounge, he realized he had never met a woman who could look at him like he was just another person. No admiration, no intimidation, just curiosity and a bit of mischief in her green eyes. So, Emily said, tilting her head, now that you've tracked me down, what do you plan to do? Adrian crossed his arms, giving her a slow, assessing look. I'd like to take you to dinner. She let out a short laugh. Why? To thank you. For handing you toilet paper? Adrian smirked. For your generosity in my moment of need. Emily leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. See, I don't think you're really here because of gratitude. I think you're here because you're not used to people laughing at you. Adrian wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or impressed. She was direct, blunt even, but not in a rude way. She was just honest. Maybe, he admitted. Or maybe I just find you interesting. She studied him for a moment, then smiled. All right. Dinner, huh? Somewhere fancy, I assume. 5-star dining, crystal chandeliers, waiters who refill your water after every sip. Would that be a problem? Emily shrugged. Not my scene. Adrian raised an eyebrow. So what is your scene? She pretended to think for a moment. There's a food truck downtown that sells the best tacos in the city. He blinked. Tacos? He grinned. You know, folded tortillas with meat. You have heard of them, right? Adrian exhaled through his nose, amused. I know what tacos are. I just wasn't expecting that to be your choice for dinner. You asked me out, she pointed out. That means I get to pick the place. Adrian debated for a moment. He wasn't exactly the food truck type. His diet usually consisted of Michelin-star meals and carefully curated dishes prepared by private chefs. But there was something about Emily that made him want to step out of his comfort zone. All right, he said. Tacos it is. Emily clapped her hands together. Great. But just so you know, there's no valet parking, and you'll probably have to eat standing up. Adrian smirked. I'll survive. Later that evening, Adrian found himself in an unfamiliar setting. The food truck Emily had raved about was parked in a bustling downtown area, surrounded by picnic tables and string lights. The scent of sizzling meat and fresh tortillas filled the air, mingling with the lively chatter of people enjoying their meals. It was worlds away from the upscale restaurants he usually frequented, but oddly enough, he didn't mind. Emily was already waiting for him, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse. She looked comfortable, completely in her element. You made it, she said, clearly amused to see him in such an environment. Adrian adjusted his sleeves. I'm a man of my word. She handed him a taco wrapped in foil. Try this. It's their specialty. Adrian unwrapped the taco, hesitating for a moment before taking a bite. Instantly, flavors exploded in his mouth. Spicy, savory, with just the right amount of heat. It was messy, nothing like the refined meals he was used to, but damn, it was good. Emily watched his reaction, grinning. Told you. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. All right, I'll admit it. This is better than I expected. She raised her taco in a mock toast. Welcome to the real world, billionaire. Adrian chuckled. You really don't care about who I am, do you? Emily tilted her head. Should I? He considered that for a moment. Most people did. Even in business, people treated him differently because of his wealth. But Emily? She didn't seem impressed or intimidated. She just treated him like a normal guy. And strangely, he found that refreshing. So, she said, taking another bite of her taco. What's the real reason you wanted to have dinner with me? Adrian took a sip of the soda she had handed him earlier. I told you. You intrigue me. That's billionaire speak for I don't like not being in control, she teased. Adrian smirked. And you're different from the people I usually meet. She rolled her eyes playfully. Let me guess. You're used to women who throw themselves at you, desperate for a taste of your wealth. He raised an eyebrow. You say that like it's my fault. Emily laughed. Fair point. But yeah, I don't really fit the gold digger stereotype. Clearly. She studied him for a moment, then asked, what's it like? What's what like? Being you. Having more money than you know what to do with. Owning hotels, private jets, all that. Adrian thought about it. It has its perks. But, he hesitated. It's isolating sometimes. Emily nodded as if she understood. I can see that. Must be hard to know who actually likes you for you. Adrian wasn't sure why, but that statement hit deeper than he expected. Before he could respond, Emily changed the subject. So, tell me something about you that isn't billionaire related. Adrian blinked. Like what? I don't know. Hobbies. Embarrassing childhood stories. Do you have a weird hidden talent? Adrian thought for a moment. I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute. Emily grinned. Now that is impressive. Way more than the billionaire thing. Adrian chuckled. And what about you? What's something I should know? She tapped her chin. I can name every capital city in the world. He raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Try me. He tested her with a few, and she got every single one right without hesitation. All right, he admitted. That's impressive. He smirked. Told you. They kept talking, eating and laughing, and before Adrian knew it, hours had passed. Was easy. Natural. He hadn't expected that. As they finished their meal, Emily stretched. Well, I hate to break it to you, Mr. Lancaster, but this is where I call it a night. Adrian frowned slightly. Just like that. He grinned. What, expecting me to swoon and invite you over? He smirked. Would have been nice. Emily shook her head, still smiling. Not happening. As she turned to leave, Adrian called after her. So, what now? She glanced back. Now you go back to your billionaire world, and I go back to mine. Adrian watched her walk away, something stirring in his chest. For the first time in a long time, someone had left him wanting more. And he had a feeling this wasn't the end. Adrian Lancaster didn't chase people. That wasn't arrogance, it was just reality. In business, in life, in relationships, people came to him. They sought his approval, his deals, his attention. But Emily Carter, she had walked away from him without hesitation. And now, all he could think about was her. It had been 3 days since their taco truck dinner, and Adrian had been strangely distracted ever since. He found himself replaying their conversation in his head, smiling at her quick wit and the way she had effortlessly pulled him out of his comfort zone. She was different. She was unpredictable. And for the first time in years, Adrian felt like he had met someone who genuinely didn't care about his wealth or status. Which was precisely why he couldn't get her out of his mind. On the 4th day, Adrian found himself back at Lancaster Grand Hotel. He told himself it was for business. He had meetings scheduled, and this was one of his properties after all. But a part of him knew the real reason he was here. And, as if the universe was on his side, he spotted her. Emily was at the reception desk, talking to a guest. She was dressed in the standard hotel uniform, her dark brown hair tied in a ponytail. She looked focused, professional, but when she glanced up and saw him, her lips twitched into an amused smirk. Adrian walked toward her with purpose, ignoring the curious glances from staff members who clearly weren't used to seeing their billionaire boss casually strolling through the lobby. Mr. Lancaster, Emily greeted playfully. To what do we owe the honor? Adrian leaned on the counter, matching her smirk. I had some business here today. Aha, she said, unconvinced. And I'm sure this has nothing to do with me, right? He shrugged. Maybe a little. He chuckled. Well, I'd love to chat, but I'm working. Then have dinner with me after your shift, he said smoothly. Emily raised an eyebrow. Are you always this persistent? When something interests me? Yes. She studied him for a moment before sighing dramatically. Fine. But I'm picking the place again. Adrian smirked. I wouldn't expect anything less. This time, Emily took Adrian to a hole-in-the-wall diner that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. The red vinyl booths were worn, the neon sign outside flickered, and the menu was handwritten on a chalkboard. Adrian didn't even bat an eye. Emily grinned as they slid into a booth. All right, Mr. Billionaire, let's see if you can survive a greasy burger and fries. Adrian smirked. Challenge accepted. They ordered, and as they waited for their food, Emily leaned forward. So tell me, Adrian, what's your deal? My deal? Yeah. You're rich, powerful, you could be whining and dining supermodels, but instead you're here, eating burgers with me. Adrian shrugged. I like your company. Emily narrowed her eyes. That's not an answer. He exhaled. Maybe I'm just tired of the usual. Maybe I'm looking for something different. She tilted her head. And you think I'm different? Extremely. He smirked. Good. I'd hate to be boring. Their food arrived, and Adrian had to admit, Emily had great taste. The burger was fantastic. Messy, greasy, but full of flavor. "So," Emily said between bites, "what's next for Adrian Lancaster?" "In what sense?" "In life, business, romance." He wiped his hands with a napkin. "Business-wise, I have some new ventures in the works. Expanding into eco-friendly resorts, looking at real estate opportunities overseas. As for romance..." He looked at her pointedly. "Still figuring that part out." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Smooth." Adrian chuckled. "I try." She shook her head, amused. "You really don't give up, do you? When something's worth pursuing?" "No." For a split second, something flickered in Emily's eyes. Something softer, more vulnerable. But just as quickly, she masked it with her usual confidence. "Well, Mr. Lancaster," she said, sipping her soda, "you might just have your work cut out for you." Adrian leaned forward. "I like a challenge." He smirked. "We'll see." As the night went on, Adrian knew one thing for certain. He wasn't letting Emily Carter slip away again. Adrian Lancaster was not the type of man who second-guessed himself. Every decision he made, whether in business or in life, was calculated, strategic, and often ruthless. He didn't chase people. He didn't waste time on things that had no guarantee of success. And yet, here he was, sitting across from Emily Carter in a rundown diner, more intrigued by her than by any high-stakes business deal he had ever negotiated. She was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. She laughed easily, spoke bluntly, and didn't seem the least bit impressed by his wealth. If anything, she found his world amusing, as if the idea of billionaires and their extravagant lifestyles was nothing more than a source of entertainment for her. Adrian had met plenty of women before, beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated. But Emily, she was real in a way that unnerved him. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was just herself. And that, oddly enough, was exactly why he couldn't stop thinking about her. As they sat in their booth, finishing their burgers, Adrian leaned forward. "So tell me, Emily, why are you working at a hotel when you clearly have the brains to do anything else?" Emily smirked. "Wow, that almost sounded like a compliment, Mr. Lancaster." It was a compliment. She took a sip of her soda, studying him. "If you must know, I like working in hospitality. It pays the bills, and I get to meet interesting people." "But you don't love it." She exhaled, twirling her straw between her fingers. "No, but it's practical. And sometimes practical wins over passion." Adrian frowned. "I don't believe that." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Of course you don't. You're a billionaire. You don't have to worry about things like rent or student loans or medical bills. For most people, passion is a luxury they can't afford." That hit Adrian harder than he expected. He had grown up privileged, sure. His father had built Lancaster Enterprises into a business empire, and Adrian had taken it even further. He had never truly needed anything. But Emily's words made him realize just how different their worlds were. Still, he wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. "Tell me then," he said. "If money weren't an issue, what would you be doing?" Emily hesitated, and for the first time that evening, she looked uncertain, vulnerable. "Writing," she admitted finally. Adrian blinked. "Writing?" She nodded. "I used to want to be a journalist. I loved storytelling, digging deep, uncovering the truth, sharing stories that mattered. But life happened. And journalism doesn't exactly pay well unless you're at the top." Adrian tilted his head. "So you gave up?" Emily's jaw tightened. I paused. There was something in her tone, something defensive but also hurt. Adrian considered her for a moment. "You're better than this job, Emily." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Don't pull the billionaire I can save you routine." "I'm not saying you need saving," Adrian replied calmly. "I'm saying you deserve better." Emily stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to be annoyed or flattered. In the end, she settled on amused. "Careful, Mr. Lancaster. You almost sound like you care. Adrian smirked. Maybe I do. Over the next few weeks, Adrian and Emily kept crossing paths. Sometimes by accident, sometimes not. Adrian found himself visiting Lancaster Grand more often than necessary, and Emily found herself looking forward to those visits, even if she would never admit it. Their conversations were always laced with sarcasm and challenges, but beneath it all, there was an undeniable pull between them. Still, Emily kept her distance. One night, after one of their now regular not dates, Adrian finally called her out on it. "You like me," he said, watching her with knowing eyes. Emily scoffed. "Wow, humble, aren't you?" He smirked. "You like me, but you're fighting it." She exhaled, rubbing her temples. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" Emily looked at him, and for once, there was no teasing in her expression. "Because guys like you don't fall for girls like me." Adrian's jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" She sighed. "It means that at the end of the day, we live in two different worlds. You date supermodels and heiresses. I work the front desk at a hotel you own. This is fun. It's entertaining. But it's not real." Adrian's eyes darkened. "It is real." Emily shook her head. "You think it is, but eventually you'll get bored. You'll move on. And I'd rather not be another name on your list of temporary distractions." Adrian stared at her, something sharp and unfamiliar twisting in his chest. Was that really what she thought? That she was just a distraction? He had spent his life surrounded by people who only wanted him for his wealth, his power. And here was Emily, someone who wanted nothing from him, yet somehow she was the only one he wanted. Taking a step closer, he lowered his voice. "Emily, I don't play games when it comes to things I want." She swallowed hard but held her ground. "And what is it that you want?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "You." For the first time since they met, Emily looked genuinely caught off guard. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as if struggling to find the right words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "That's what scares me." Before Adrian could respond, Emily stepped back. "I need time," she said softly. Adrian clenched his jaw, forcing himself to respect her space. "Take all the time you need." Emily nodded once, then turned and walked away. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Lancaster found himself waiting for something he couldn't control. For the first time in his life, Adrian Lancaster felt completely out of control. Emily Carter had walked away, leaving him with nothing but the weight of her words. "That's what scares me." He had built his empire on certainty, on knowing every outcome before he even made a move. In business, risk was calculated. But when it came to Emily, there was no strategy, no playbook, just the terrifying reality that she might never let him in. And yet, he couldn't walk away. Days passed. Then a week. Adrian gave Emily the space she asked for, but he couldn't ignore the restless energy buzzing inside him. He still went to the Lancaster Grand Hotel, but he made sure not to seek her out, until one night she found him. He was in the rooftop lounge of the hotel, nursing a glass of whiskey, staring out at the city skyline when he heard her voice behind him. "You stopped coming to find me." Adrian turned, surprised but careful not to show it. Emily stood there, her arms crossed, but there was something softer in her expression. "You asked for space," he said simply. She bit her lip. "And you actually listened. That's unexpected." Adrian smirked. "I'm full of surprises." Emily exhaled, stepping forward. "Look, I know I've been pushing you away." "You have." She gave him a look. "I was hoping you wouldn't agree so quickly." Adrian chuckled. "I told you, Emily. I don't play games." She hesitated, then sat down next to him. "Neither do I. That's why this has been hard for me." Adrian studied her face, waiting. "I like you," she admitted finally. "More than I probably should. But I'm scared of what happens next." He set his glass down, leaning forward. "Then let me make this easy for you." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Easy, huh?" "Yes," Adrian said. You don't have to figure out the future right now. You don't have to worry about how this ends. Just let yourself feel whatever it is you're feeling. She looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her green eyes. And if I get hurt? Adrian's jaw tightened. Then I'll spend every damn day proving to you that you won't. Silence stretched between them. Then finally Emily sighed. You're really not going to let me keep pushing you away, are you? Adrian smirked. Not a chance. And for the first time, Emily didn't walk away. A week later, Adrian did something completely out of character. He took a day off. Not for business. Not for an event. But for Emily. She had challenged him to experience life outside of luxury. So he let her take control for the day. No private jets, no five-star dining. Just the two of them wandering through the city like two ordinary people. They had coffee from a tiny cafe that barely had seating, browsed old bookstores, and even rode the subway, something Adrian had never done before. How is this possible? He asked as they squeezed into a crowded train. People actually willingly do this. Emily laughed. Welcome to public transportation, Mr. Lancaster. Not a fan, he muttered as a stranger's backpack smacked him in the shoulder. He grinned. I figured. But despite the unfamiliarity, Adrian enjoyed himself more than he expected. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about work, money, or status. He was just living. And it was because of her. Later that evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sun set, Adrian turned to her. So, do I get your approval? Emily smirked. You survived the subway without having a meltdown. I'd say you did all right. Adrian chuckled. High praise. She studied him for a moment. You know, I think I misjudged you at first. Oh, she nodded. I thought you were just another rich guy looking for a distraction. But you're more than that. Adrian reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. And what if I said the same about you? That you're more than just the woman who handed me toilet paper that day. Emily laughed. A true modern love story. Adrian smiled. It's a start. And as the city lights flickered to life around them, Emily finally stopped fighting what had been inevitable all along. She leaned in and kissed him.